Hello everyone, it is Joe here from OmniPoke, the channel that brings you guys everything Pokemon. If you're looking for PTCG live codes, make sure you check out the Potown store. You can get a 5% discount on your orders using that code OmniPoke. For today's video, I'm going to be going over the Twilight Masquerade buy list. The set is coming out this week, so perfect time to start getting those orders in so that we have them ready for the NAIC. Let's start off with the core essentials. These are cards that I'm expecting to be involved in tier 1 or 2 contenders or have an obvious amount of future potential. On the top left, we have 3 ace spec cards. The Legacy Energy immediately slots into Lugia really nicely. Obviously, Archeops can pull the Legacy Energy out of the deck for you, so there's no issue in finding this card and making sure that you get access to it. And we immediately gain a couple of great synergies here with Iron Hands as well as Luminion now having a means of going back into the deck after using it in the opening stages to get our turn 2 Summoning Star. By the same merit, we can also just throw this onto Lugia or throw it onto Cincino to be more dangerous and have better uptrade potential. Then we have Unfair Stamp, a very general utility type A-spec which can find its way into all sorts of archetypes. Definitely one worth considering for Arvin engines, so looking at Charizard builds, Gardevoir builds, Dragapult builds as well, especially because these are more defensive archetypes. Having a way to slow down some aggressive low to the ground EX basic attacking decks seems like a really good strategy. Then we have Scoop Up Cyclone, another really promising card. This is of course a decent switching option, but is so much more than that because it can also be a pseudo healing option as well, or just generally trying to fix your board and remove multi-prize Pokemon from play. It's a super versatile card that you can consider certainly in Dragapult, but also the new Greninja deck, and is another one of these really searchable, easy items that can be justified in a lot of archetypes. Next up, we have the most interesting supporter cards. We start with Lana's Assistance. It's a spiritual reprint to Clara, although it can't get back rulebox Pokemon, so it is a lot more limited in how we can use this card. Although I don't think this goes immediately into any tier 1 or 2 contenders that we currently have, it certainly has precedent to be a strong card, and is a great one to have in the future. Kieran combines a switching effect as well as a damage modifier. This is really good on a supporter card because it's something that can't be hit with Eerie when you're up against the Pidgeot and Snorlax controlling archetypes, but it can also be a really important damage modifying card to help out in a number of matchups. Certainly things like Charizard might look to have this card to allow that Burning Darkness to be a much more early game dangerous threat. So it's really nice to have a support card like this, which is multifaceted. It's going to be useful in controlling matchups, but also could be a great damage mod in other situations. Then we have Carmine. I think getting 4 of these is pretty reasonable because it might be the backbone of some new aggressive archetypes that want to go first and still have deep digs into the deck. I'm certainly thinking about Lugia, but there has been as many as 4 copies within that deck list, completely overtaking Professor's research. However, I think a more balanced approach is going to be the more likely outcome for the archetype. The fact that we have Carmine and Squawkability EX as early dig options in the game means that we really can cycle through a huge number of cards on turn 1, so there may be a handful of archetypes that can take advantage of this. The one stadium I think is a core essential is the Jamming Tower. This card's been showing up in a lot of Lugia archetypes, but is also one of these sort of tech one-offs that I wouldn't be surprised to go into all sorts of archetypes, because we have still so many strong tool cards in the format right now that it's important to shut them down. The upside of Jamming Tower compared to Lost Vacuum, of course, is that you're also combining a tool disruption card plus a stadium disruption card all in one slot, so sometimes lists that are tight on space will go for this option rather than committing spaces to one vacuum to deal with the tool cards and then have your own counter stadiums in your deck as well. Next up, we have the Bug Catching set. This could be good for some Teal Mask Ogerpon builds and could be good for the Festival lead deck, but that's not the reason why I'm saying you should pick up 4 now. It's because we have to consider every grass card that comes out from this point to be enabled by this Bug Catching set to give us good early game consistency and allow us to cut corners, possibly having less grass energy within the list whilst maintaining that consistency of attachments in the form of this item card. Next up, we have the Waking Whistle. I actually think it's called Accompanying Flute in English, but it's going to be a really helpful card for Snorlax blocking archetypes as well as Pidgeot control possibly, where we have the option to force Pokemon into play to then trap later down the line. Although it's not really space efficient compared to Mantine, it's a much stronger option to have in your list. The final item I think is important to pick up is Enhanced Hammer at a 2 count. This is definitely going to be a strong tech option. Because Lugia is on the rise, it's really nice to have an item because many of these lists once again will play Irida or Arven, so having great access to this card to immediately respond on a Legacy is a big deal. Dragapult EX is being touted as the new big bad from the set. I recommend getting 4 Droopy, 4 Drakloak, as well as 3 Dragapult EX themselves. It's a very versatile dragon type Pokemon that has a really nice flexible damage output option. There's also so many ways we can try building the Dragapult. There's the option to combine it with Charizard EX, Pidgeot EX, Xatu, and even Lost Zone engines. So with this sort of versatility and flexibility with its own damage output, I think it's inevitable that this is going to be a tier 1 or 2 contender for a decent amount of time. Blood Moon Ursaluna is that universal Radiant Charizard but on a 2-prize Pokemon. It has 260 hit points on a basic that's also absolutely monstrous. It's already finding its way into Lugia's, Lost Zone box decks, and can be justified in a handful of other archetypes as well. It's a really nice late game option for a number of archetypes, so it's easily justified in all sorts of decks. We then come to the Teal Mask Ogerpon EX. That Teal dance is great energy acceleration and draws cards as you go. I think its versatility really puts it on this slide where I'm thinking it could go alongside Regidrago V-Star, Raging Bolt EX. It could be its own deck with just other Ogerpons as a smorgasbord with the new masks, although I think that one's a little bit less likely. But there's no doubt that with Energy Switch, this card has bags of potential. Any new, like, colorless attacking deck going forward can consider this as a new engine to fall back on. And at the same time, the Ogerpon itself at least hits for weakness on Charizard, which is still relevant right now. I recommend picking up just 2 copies of Iron Thorns EX. I don't think a quad Iron Thorns deck is going to work, so I think it's more likely going to be a bit part player in the likes of the Future Hands archetype or Miraidon builds. That initialize ability is still really scary and does shut down a number of archetypes, so I do think this card could be relevant, but I don't necessarily think it's strong enough to be a frontman, so I think 2 copies is fine. Then we have the Wellspring Mask Ogerpon EX. Again, if you want to try out the Ogerpon deck, be my guest, but I'm putting it on the slide as an essential here because I do think it slots really nicely into Lugia, giving the deck a potential early game sniping option for lower hit point archetypes, and also a backdoor trapping win condition with Sob. When you use a double turbo energy, that goes down to a 0 damage output trapping option. We then have another stage 2, the Greninja EX. Actually a pretty interesting one. There's a couple of Froakies I'd recommend, one from Obsidian Flames that has 70 hit points, and the one coming out from this set has 10 less hit points, but a much stronger attack. So we might be playing a split of our Froakies here. The Greninja itself is a throwback to Urshifu VMAX, where it has a 1 energy decent damage output option, as well as a 3 energy spreading attack. Greninja EX is also of course a fighting type, which is going to be relevant if there's going to be Blissey EX, Miraidon EX, and Future Hands builds in the format. Whilst at the same time, it looks like it can take advantage of a Devolve approach with Frostlass as a likely partner, which I'm also recommending picking up 4 of. We then have the new Blissey EX. I'm recommending a 4-4 line of this one because Blissey is partly your engine in a lot of ways. You'd want to have Happy Switch on board for as much as possible to cash in on your use of Monkey Dory, whilst at the same time, its own attack is a way for you to draw back up to 6 cards in your hand. So Blissey EX is such a core component of the archetype, you want to maximize your copies here, similar to how we've seen maximum copies of Arceus V-Star in some of those builds. I actually recommend the new Chansey coming out from this set with 120 hit points because it does have an attack which can just allow you to put another energy into play on your bench. You're likely going to be using an Arven plus TM Turbo Energize build here to get some early game energy into play, but whiffing that combination still gives you this Chansey option to at least get 1 more energy down, so when you're up against the aggressive archetypes like Raging Bot and Miraidon, you're not just losing all your energy on the board in 1 turn. The other Chansey, which is quite interesting, from our 151 set, it does have 10 less hit points, but that lucky bonus is an attractive ability to fall back on and can create some highlight reel moments. I want to get 4 Monkey Dory. You play that many in the Blissey archetype. If you're looking to play the likes of Gardevoir, however, I think 2 copies should be sufficient. That Adrenaline Power may only go into a handful of archetypes because you sacrifice your turn attachment on this Pokemon, but it is a great swing card in a number of matchups, providing both healing and additional damage output in the deck. So much so that I've even heard murmurings of like ancient style decks looking to play this Monkey Dory, possibly even some Magma Basin archetypes looking for a damage mod. There's a lot of cool synergies for this card, and I feel like its potential is still being unearthed as we go. Tatsugiri is a great new basic Pokemon that gives us a great consistency boost in a number of archetypes. That Attract Customers ability allows us to dig for supporter cards, certainly can be great for some aggressive archetypes. I'm looking at Miraidon, for example, and possibly Future Hands. These are archetypes that have played Pokegear in the past, but having Tatsugiri as an on-board card can be a much more effective means of protecting yourself against Iono. It can also be a fallback engine for some of these setup decks as well, simply retreating into Tatsugiri to give yourself a higher odds of hitting the likes of Arven in the opening stages is still a big bonus. Then we move on to the Believer buy list. These are cards that may prove themselves to be mid-tier contenders or have a good amount of potential. There are 3 other ace specs on this slide. The Hyper Aroma, I was kind of torn between Believer and being in the core essentials. I do think this one falls short of the mark in most of the archetypes that I'm building right now, but I do know that a number of Gardevoir lists in Japan have looked to use Hyper Aroma instead of an Arven TM Evolution approach. I personally think it's a little bit riskier, but it's still one worth considering. Survival Cast, I think, falls short compared to Hero's Cape, but it is kind of dependent on how many one-hit KO archetypes are in the format. If Chien-Pao is still going strong, if Raging Bolt Ogerpon really picks up in play, play. And if Cinccino's are coming in swinging, it may be more important to have that sort of guaranteed survival rather than pushing yourself to a higher range of hit points. Right now I'm leaning towards Hero's Cape because it's been so versatile and helpful in the past, but it could also be usurped by this tool instead. Secret Box is certainly interesting and versatile. It does give you potentially extra discard synergy for a number of archetypes, and does generate a lot of value with the amount of cards you can get out of it, and might even be like a build-around style card. However, it's firstly got some stiff competition. The main one that I'm considering is possibly overtaking Awakening Drum in Ancient Box, and possibly some fire-style Magma Basin builds that also look to incorporate Sada, thinking of like Gouging Fire decks. These aren't that high tier though, and they are quite niche, and even then they have other options in the list. So at the moment it's kind of a lying in wait card for the right archetype to come around. Similar story for Boomerang Energy. That's definitely a powerful effect, but we do lack decent cards that can take advantage of this right now. Handy Fan could be good in some stalling archetypes, although hit point buffing tools are also really important in those archetypes. Hassle has a fairly powerful effect, but it does have niche utility. I don't think it's ever going to be like a maximum copy in any archetype, but I think picking up a couple is pretty safe, especially if you have a tendency to play single prize archetypes. We then have the really cool festival lead stuff. We have the Thwackies with insane abilities. Goldeen could certainly be good. I think you only really need to pick up 1 or 2 if you're looking to play the attacking Diplim deck, but I think 3 copies is fine if you're looking to play a more control style approach, which is still questionable in its own right. But the Goldeen has a pretty powerful attack in that sort of deck. Diplim boasts good type coverage and can have some reasonable damage output if you are throwing tools into the mix, but I'm certain this archetype will be pretty bad into Dragapult, which is still looking like a top contender. Morpeko Snack Search ability is pretty handy, can be useful in Miraidon and useful in Ancient Box decks, but I think it oftentimes falls short of the 60 card list. Luxray EX, also a card with great potential. I think the best Shinx aren't actually coming out from this set. There's 2 from Paldea Evolved that are both better. There's one that has 70 hit points and one with 40 hit points, but a pretty strong ability. So if you are looking to build a sort of hand-locking controlling archetype around Luxray, I would look to pick those basics up instead. We then have the remaining Ogerpon stuff. If you want to play the Ogerpon deck where you're jumping in and out of different Ogerpon as you go, looking to use Earthen Vessel for different energy types, or having a number of Luminous Energy in your list, be my guest and pick up those Ogre Masks. No doubt it's going to be a fun build. Cornerstone Ogerpon EX undoubtedly has a very annoying ability for a number of archetypes. It could be useful as a tech option in controlling decks, even if you're not looking to get attacks in with it. And then we have the Half-Flame Ogerpon EX, definitely has the strongest damage output potential. If you're someone that likes playing Arceus Armor Rouge, this is a big upgrade for that archetype, and it could catch some opponents off guard if you're playing the Ogre's Mask lists. We then have a couple interesting basic attacking Pokemon. Pheasantipede could be a consideration card in Gardevoir. If there's enough other single prize decks in the room, Pheasantipede can give you an edge in those matchups because you're constantly forcing your opponent to flip coins against you, or consistently find Gust. And Iron Leaves has an appealing type coverage option if Charizard's still going to be a relevant Pokemon in the meta. It could be a decent Mirage Gate option in Lost Zone decks, or if we are seeing type coverage builds of the Future Box, it could also see some play. Do bear in mind you have to have some damage mods to make the Iron Leaves KO Charizard cleanly, so to make the most out of it, it does command a few spots in your deck list. That's it though for my Believer and Core buy list. It's looking to be a really strong set, not only in the immediate future, but also a lot of cards that are lying in wait to be broken. Let me know what you're picking up from the Believer buy list. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you tomorrow for another video. Cheers.